Hello, everybody.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Genealogy Adventures.
Yes. Welcome to Genealogy Adventures. Oh, we have a really great show today. We're lined up with Althea Sumter with the Gullah Geechee. But before we bring Althea on, I just want to say congratulations to my cousin Brian for an awesome showing at the Virginia. What was it called again? Um,
Oh, the Library of Virginia Conference on Family Research.
Yes, he was there yesterday, and it's been popping up with people just on our genealogy page. It's hot, and they were just really just congratulating him and happy to meet him and things of that nature on his overall just his speech on Native American migration and things and African American migration and things of that nature. I also want to congratulate our winner, who was our 2000th person to like the page, Mitchell Gordon. We are excited. We're going to start looking on his stuff. So Mitchell will win a 10-hour researching by Brian and myself. And we're going to research his family and some information on his family. And his cousin, Time White, will be the one that will be online as we divulge her information, their information, and what we found and things of that nature. So
Yeah.
congratulations to you, Mitchell. Um, Brian, is there anything you want to say before I introduce Althea?
Nope, just to say thank you for that. Also, to let everyone know, I can't go into details at the moment, but I'm very pleased to say that the publishers reached out to me and asked me to write 2 genealogy books. So that's going to be me as a very busy bloke for the next couple of months.
Can I say how happy I am for him? I just need y'all to know that. Like, I love my cousin with everything in me. And I'm telling you, I want to be like him when he grow up. When I grow up, that's who I want to be like, right there. So I'm so happy. I'm so proud of him that he's received that. Um, we're having some issues as far as our video is concerned. So if you guys are leaving messages, continue to leave the messages. We may reply to you a little slowly, but we will reply to you. We also will, if you have questions for our out there for our guests, put them up there, and we'll hopefully be able to get them live so that you can ask them. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to you guys Althea Sumter. Althea is our Gullah Geechee guru. That's what I'm gonna say. So hey, Althea, how are you today?
Hello, and thank you for inviting me on your show.
No problem, no problem. We're very excited. So let me say this, Brian.
Hmm.
When I was talking to Althea over inbox, the first thing she wanted to clear up, there are no slashes between Gullah and Geechee.
Oh, okay. I learned something new already.
So before you go into explaining that, I want you to tell people who you are and what's your expertise in all of this.
My name is Althea Sumter, and I'm from St. Helena Island, South Carolina. That is part of the Beaufort County and of the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor. And that corridor was designated in 2006 as the first heritage area designated by congressional law, and the only heritage area that is represents a culture within this country. So I have not only am I from St. Helena Island, but part of the Gullah Geechee culture has become significant in recent years because it was not a culture recognized until very recently. And I'm a former producer and documentary producer for non-fiction documentary, non-fiction storytelling. And I've turned that, my career into academic career, teaching those who want to go into production. And I have since recently retired from teaching, but now focus all of my work on documenting the stories of elders.
Awesome.
And that's what I concentrate on now.
All right, all right. You have questions?
I'm, I will leave you for the first question.
Well, my first question basically is, see, I don't want to jump into that right away, but in a way I do. One of the things that I've learned in my research for our family is that through DNA, I've learned that I actually have some connection to the Gullah Geechee culture.
Oh.
But I have no idea how, no idea who, no idea where, no, and it's just it's a question to me for the two places to be so different from each other. They're like, Edgefield is here, it's more northern, and then you have the Helena and the Beaufort County, it's further down, it's over onto the coast, or if I'm not mistaken. I don't see where they collided. So how do I go about trying to find out like where my how my roots got mixed with the Gullah Geechee roots?
And I look at the storytelling from what you see in your genealogy, and I start looking for those kernels that give me historical information and start exploring the context of your family story. And so that's what I follow. People can do the DNA. I have done my DNA that has now disclosed that I have even Chinese and East and South Asian DNA along with Scandinavian. So how that does unfold, I have no idea.
Wow.
But dominate in terms of the cultural groups, the ethnic groups that creolize into the Gullah Geechee culture, which is Angolan, and Rice Coast, which is in Sierra Leone area. But the thing that I'm finding is that a lot of people may have picked up little elements of stories from their elders, and I really encourage people to do that, to look at the stories of their elders. And from there, I can take from where you are and start going back in documents that could be an amazing finds. Obituaries, I encourage people to always keep obituaries.
Yes.
Because government documents do not always give all of the little details that come through in the obituaries.
So one of
And
the things.
so the thing is that with the Gullah Geechee culture is that it goes from Pender County, North Carolina, which is just above Wilmington, to St. Augustine, Florida, St. Johns County, from coast to 30 miles in. That's a lot of territory. So I like to define where I tracked your own family story. Is it in South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, or Florida?
So one thing I'd like to do is to take a step back and kind of go right back to the beginning. So if you, and again, as you're talking about this, I'm hoping that people, as you were saying, if you can identify at least the state or the part of the original counties, sorry, not counties, the territories, colonial territories, that'll help people start thinking about the kind of records they need to research their Gullah ancestors. So could you just tell us a bit about the history of the foundation of the Gullah community, where they were coming from like the Caribbean and Africa, and kind of what really went into the foundation of them as a distinct community?
The culture is creolized, and I like using that word because it's something that was combined all of the ethnic groups that were picked up intact and brought to the coastal area of the southeast coastal area, from the ethnic groups in southern Senegambia to the current day southern Senegambia to current day northern Liberia. And those ethnic groups were rice growers. Rice is indigenous to that location in West Africa. And indigenous rice, it was something that was interested the Europeans, who then took, my ethnic group to the coastal areas that the topography is exactly the same, to grow rice within the period of time that is the late 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, that also included the indigenous properties of indigo, from the same rice territory, and then cotton from the same territory in West Africa. The plantations that you see now along the southeastern coast, those are not cotton plantations, those are rice plantations.
Mm.
So rice came first. And so all those ethnic groups creolized into what we now know today as a Gullah Geechee culture.
So in terms of the culture, before I start drilling down into the real genealogy of it, am I right in thinking, as you're saying, they were a creolized people? Did they create did they take bits and pieces from the different kind of ethnic and tribal groups that they belonged to, and kind of create a bigger culture out of the distinctly different parts that they came from?
But when you are looking at what is even today, ethnic groups that are, for example, Thai, Shribro, Temne, Minde, Limbra, and so forth, if from that particular area, those ethnic groups, all rice growers, did not matter to those who are of European trade wanting to grow rice in the colonies. They were just looking for people with the knowledge of rice. And
Okay.
so it's a matter of once getting into, and the language and culture and the creolization starts on the ships when you're under the belly and you try to make contact with each other even more so than the contact you've made from your origin. And so from that, you have to find a way to communicate.
And if I'm looking at my DNA results, is there kind of a Gullah Geechee kind of African admixture that people should kind of keep an eye out for?
Yeah, there are a specific list of ethnic groups within that area that are the several groups of people that are part of the original Rice Coast area. And so there is a list that's available online, who are the origins of the what is now Gullah Geechee culture. And it'll actually take you into that West African territory that I mentioned. A lot of people focus on Sierra Leone. And so that has become that central focus of the culture, of the ethnic groups in that area. Just as some people say that South Carolina is the, rock bed of the culture. And I now more and more people are understanding it's a lot more than just South Carolina.
Okay, I've got one more, and I promise I'll let you
Go
jump.
ahead. No, go ahead. I'm good. I'm trying to. I got people asking questions, so I'm trying
Okay.
to fix it.
So obviously, a lot of this, this is going to be slavery based. So we're talking about enslaved people. While we've just been talking about maybe, Africanized admixtures that people might indicate Gullah inheritance. Can you name some of the kind of larger enslaving families that the Gullah were kept by?
You do have to look at the what do you call the colonists, the plantation owners that are different from South Carolina and also from into Georgia. So you do have different clusters of Europeans, but you also have to look at when what is it colonial what is it, beginnings started in South Carolina, which is very different from Georgia, because Georgia did not accept enslaved anyone until 1750, because their original experiment, being a penal colony, they realized it was not going to work in their earlier stage in like early 1700s. So they moved from taking the penal, in England under Oglethorpe, taking folks from the prisons and such to pay off debts, said, oh, we're not being able to compete with South Carolina and such, so we're going to start enslaving those. From there were little colonial plantations and such. But earlier days, you look at the list that's available online of plantation owners in South Carolina and Georgia and so forth. And then you'll actually help in getting the specific names of the plantation owners along the coast.
Because I've been working on the Bull, Middleton, Blakely, Guerrard, Butler. There's a whole group of us. There's about 20 of
Yes.
us actually looking
So
looking
you
to
know those
those.
names out there?
Yes, I do. And you have the Draytons, you have the Middletons, and the Calhouns.
Hmm.
Yes, and those they concentrated first in Charleston and spread out from there, into the ports of Charleston. And you have Beaufort as one of the dominant cultural plantation areas, and starting in the 1600s. And so from there it spreads a little north into the Georgetown area of South Carolina, which was considered from Beaufort to Georgetown as the Rice Canal. And so those particular areas that you look for the names of plantation owners and go to the list. I do have my own list of all the plantations in South Carolina and then Georgia. And then when you get into North Carolina, you are looking at some of the similar names as Charleston because they are family connections whose to say sons wanted to expand outside of the family holdings and moved into North Carolina. So you'll see similar names there. And Florida is a completely different story in terms of Gullah Geechee presence in Florida, because there you're talking about a lot of maroon societies, those who escaped from the plantations in South Carolina, then in Georgia as it formed. And because under Spanish control, you're actually under a non-enslaved situation. And that's where you have the story of the Seminoles, which was a formed group. The Seminoles is a created group of Gullah Geechee. It's called the Five Nations, and it includes Gullah Geechee. And there's a reason why I now today use the word as a cultural name as Gullah Geechee. It is combining the two. That
Wow.
is separated.
So, okay, so you just kind of threw out two things that really kind of blew me. And that was number one, the Calhouns, because my mom is so connected. Her DNA connects to so many Calhouns. It's
Mhm.
crazy. And it's all of the white Calhouns that she actually connects to. So, and it happens to be these particular Calhouns connect to, what is the vice president, I think?
Yes, yes, it
The
is.
vice president of the United States. All of them connect to him. So that's crazy. And then you also mentioned the maroon. Now, I was told that the maroon out of Florida were Native Americans at one point, and these were the escapees. And I was told that my grandfather favored them. So, are we saying, or are you saying that that could be the possible way that I connect as far as this Gullah Geechee DNA that I'm pulling as far as the Sierra Leone? Because both my mom and myself carry a good 10% of Sierra Leone.
Yes.
Wow.
The reason why Gullah Geechee culture is also dominant, or I wouldn't say dominant, is part of the formation of the Seminole, is that it was a place of safety. It was a runaway. You have to also understand that in early Spanish control of Florida, you had the a forming of St. Augustine that included so many Africans, free Africans, and that the with the Spanish control, you had a place where those who escaped from the plantations going south from South Carolina, and then as Georgia was formed, and then to Georgia, going across the line into Florida, and you have the Maroons that were part of the formation of also who were left, the indigenous population who were left in Florida because so many early members of the indigenous populations were slaughtered.
Wow.
That's the simplest word to say. So you have a safety zone. Maroon, variation of the term for runaway, is where you use maroon, as there are maroon societies formed of the indigenous population and runaways. So when we look at the Gullah Geechee migration, and we always look at Florida. And in Florida, as a large population of that group that also connects to Oklahoma, because you have that during the at the end of the Second Seminole War in the 1830s, there was a different route that the U.S. government took those who were removed from Florida to Oklahoma. And that's where you have another segment of Gullah Geechee culture in Oklahoma as part of the Seminoles who were then taken from Florida. And that's probably another trail, because there are a couple other links of the migration of the culture, but that's where the Gullah Geechee culture links to Florida and then on to Oklahoma. I hope that helps with your, trying to figure out how that Gullah Geechee DNA is part of your family.
Yeah, that does help. That helps a lot. So, how did you get started into genealogical research? What made you say, "Oh, I want to find this out"?
I fell into it.
Most people. We trip, we fall, we get pushed, we get made to do it. But so what happened?
Well, yeah. Well, growing up in the culture was difficult because I mentioned earlier that we are just now being recognized as a culture. I grew up being laughed at. Being called Geechee was a fighting word. And people laughed at us, and we were strange people, those odd folks who are on those islands, and they talk strange, and they're hoodoo people, and a whole sorts of pejorative kinds of ways of looking at oddities. And that's how I grew up. And we grew up with being of a dual culture, when you have your cultural language in the household, and it is designated as a language. Gullah is a designated language,
Right.
and a recognized language now. But at that time, then when I go off the island into town, we code switch. I would have the most exact and perfect manner of speaking, that we would use what we call the King's English,
Wow.
that English that is spoken in New England, to the point where some people wondered if we were even from New England. So it is a matter of how you enunciate and present yourself. And so and that's how I grew up, in culture shame. And we, up and down the coast, grew up in culture shame.
Wow.
Do you think part of that shaming was because, I don't want to use the word resist, but because as a people you weren't stripped of that culture as other African descended peoples were?
We were recognized now by as many as one of the most intact African cultures within this country, and that's where the congressional law has been passed in recognizing the importance of of my culture, and the retention of a culture. Where it's amazing how now I can relate to Sierra Leoneans without any problems with the foodways, cultural behaviors, some of the common language, what we call the lingua franca, which really is a return from the Gullah Geechee culture back to the Sierra Leone. It's Creole, Krio, and Creole is an extension of all those ethnic groups that were then, during the Revolutionary War, were asked by the British and said, you join us and let's set you free. Ended up in Nova Scotia, which is another one of the cultural migration links. Some people of the culture are still there today. And then you have those who said, no, it's too cold. We're going to go back home.
That would have been me.
That,
That would have been me. I have to have all four seasons. It's just
and that's where the lingual link happens, and returning to Sierra Leone. So that's the common language. So I can understand Creole and understand those from Sierra Leone. We have the same foods, the same links. We are linked now and confirmed linked today. So that's the thing where you're looking at the migration, looking at the culture and the behavior and the foods and embedded in, but we didn't know until recently. We had not a clue why people laughed and joked about us. Now everybody wants to come in around the islands and look for Gullah Geechee. It's like, really?
So this is my thing. Okay, so I keep my hair braided. It's braided now, y'all. It's just in a ponytail. But I keep my hair braided, and the women that braid my hair, and I told you this story, I think. The women that braid my hair are all Africans. I've been going to them for over 16, 17 years now. And one of them who was braiding my hair, she's very interested in my research, and she she saw my book, and she was, really proud of me for my book and things of that nature. And she went in to explain to me who Sierra Leoneans are. So I want to know if you know the same thing that she told me. According to her, Africans must learn all about the migration from Africa to slavery, the forced migration from Africa to slavery. This was one of the things that she told me. And she also stated to me that when they grouped these African Americans in the Sierra Leone area, they were grouped from different places and then placed on the boat and then brought across. Well, when they stopped, they never came back and got those ones that were there. So this made up Sierra Leone. This is what she told me. She said, so Sierra Leone is not one particular country. It was actually a mix of different Africans from different countries that were brought there to get on the boat, and they never came back and got them. And that's what created Sierra Leone. Is that true?
Sierra Leone is the name of given to that area by the British colonists. Its origins is really about a lot of ethnic groups who did trade in the area. And that's where you had such a grouping of people for that colonial period that traded. It was a major trade area. It's in the coastal area, and going into the interior, into Nigeria, back and forth. So the thing that in going into that the building of the slave castle, there are lots up and down throughout the coast and around the Horn, around the I call it the curve into that Bunce Island became that island of no return. So off into collecting the people who had the skills requested by plantation owners. That's the one thing to understand as well, is that there was a skills list that plantation owners wanted. And so you had Africans with a certain skills based on collectives and such, the skills dominated by certain people, the net casting groups and the fisheries, the ones who knew, like I said, how to grow rice, the ones who are the basket weavers and such. And so you're looking for people with certain skills. And that collective were the ones taken and onto Bunce Island. And the unfortunate thing about the purchase of human commodity is that it was a business, and it was an unfortunate and terrible business of human trade. And as a human trade in terms of the skills that Africans had that was necessary for the development of the colonial areas, not just in the United States, what would become the United States, because only 4% of all the African diaspora ended up in the United States. The rest, you had that, 49% in the Caribbean West Indies and 47% in what is Mexico and the South America. So it's, so that's what it is only dominated by. We want this certain skill and that certain skill and that certain skill on the plantation, or this one or that expertise. So, one thing I just realized that I didn't finish the story of how I then fell into doing this work. That was, I was I having grown up in culture shame, I wanted to be as far away as possible from the islands and such. And I was more interested in finding why I spoke English. Why do I speak English? And that meant following and trailing the stories of others. And, who are the others for me are Anglo-Saxons. So I went, and as a documentary producer, I went into storytelling about cultures. And going into the production industry, every time I turned around, I kept falling into somebody who had something that says, "Oh, have you read this book? This is about where you're from." Gullah Geechee. Every time throughout all of my career, and then going into academia, running into someone who kept saying, "Oh, have you read such and such a book? This is about your culture." It kept following me. My culture wouldn't let me go. And so I turned around and I went, all right, my experience in South Carolina State Archives, research and genealogy division when I was in grad school was one of the most critical jobs of my life. And that's what all of a sudden helped me find the ways to explore researching people's stories. And from that, I then started focusing on the story of my own culture and finding a lot of material.
Wow.
Well, something else that I wanted your input on, because as I said, I've spent probably about the last 6 months researching, along with others, Major Pierce Butler, and noticing the names of a lot of his enslaved people were actually African names. One, I was really surprised he let them do that. That he didn't make them name their children Elizabeth or Betty and Charles. So you're seeing names like Cujo, for instance, and off the top of my head, I can't remember some of the other names, but I know they were named for their names recognized the day of the week that they were born on. Like if you were a male and you were born on a Monday, your parents gave you this name. If you were a woman, they gave you that name. Are there some other kind of distinctly African names within the Gullah community that again might trigger someone to say, "Oh, okay, I think I'm looking at a Gullah ancestor"?
Those names would actually appear in what we call basket names. Basket names, or you'd call nicknames. And those are the names that your family would call you, as opposed to what you would be listed in I like to say government papers, government documents.
That government name that the kids be talking about.
The government, your government name. And so your family name or your basket name, I found, for example, I had an aunt whose basket name is Chansom. I found that in West African name area in that Rice Coast area. It's amazing, my mother had the name Ada. That was also West African. She had, and it's amazing. You find out these, but we know these names. But you also understand that in this country, in the U.S., we have, and I've learned that there are 60,000 loan words from West Africa.
Wow.
In this country alone, 60,000.
Wow.
So in there would also be a lot of names. So, tote is a West African word. Nana, goober, a lot of words. Even bene is West African.
Wow.
So that's the thing, is that, it takes a lot of unfolding of just the minute elements of a word, a name, and such. And I think I've been at this, falling into it for such a long time. It's hard for me to then simplify how you do the storytelling and the research.
Any questions from our audience?
Well, that's the problem, and I'm glad you brought that up. For whatever reason, Facebook is just like not cooperating. And normally, out there, we have questions from our
Oh, okay.
audience. So I want our audience to know, because they can hear us, but they can't see us, and they're having problems because I can't even see it. That's what I've been trying to pull up, and they're having problems. So I have been guiding them to our internet site, which is the Listen Vision Live. And what I'm going to suggest is that they come on there, write their questions down, and then come back and post what their questions are. And hopefully you'll be able to, go on and answer any questions after the fact. Hopefully you'll be able to do that. I'm so sorry about that, because we do have people that were we had over 2,000 people just ready and prime.
Oh my God.
Yes, they were ready and prime to just like really talk to you, but there have been issues on Facebook, and I've been trying to pull and see, but it won't let me see the video.
Uh,
So in the meantime, you can actually see us on
ListenVisionLive.com.
listenvisionlive.com.
Yes.
And what we'll do, as per normal, the video, we will download the video. It'll be on YouTube, and I can also upload it to Facebook tomorrow.
Right.
So sorry, but again, this time it's not us. This is it's a Facebook issue.
It's a Facebook issue. It is not. It's not us at all. It is a Facebook issue. But I'm so happy and glad that you decided to come and talk more with us. So my next question, and then tell me, you was talking about the culture. And I think this kind of fits in what you and I were talking about earlier. Mm-hmm. And okay, so
go ahead.
I know.
Go ahead.
I'm trying to
Direct.
Frame it right. So when you discussed the culture, you said you went in and you started to learn about and tell the stories of the culture. I have a friend who doesn't feel like African Americans tell the story of the culture. How do we fix that?
There are so many pieces of history, of the story, of facts that have been, and don't use the word suppressed, but that has not been learned by Black folks. And yeah, I'm one of those people who say the word Black folks. I know the Creole, the coloring of people happened in the colonies, Black, white, and so forth. But I have gone through, in terms of dealing with archives and such, I've gone through so many name changes of the people of African descent that I just say Black, white, what have you, to simplify things. I've run into Negro, Afro, African American. I've lived through being from colored. Yeah, yes, I'm old enough. What is it? Jim Crow era child. Yes, I am. Segregation
beautiful.
signs and such. Colored, Negro, Afro American, Black, and I stopped. So as Black folks, and also as white folks in this country, any person in this country, the information has not been told correctly. History has not been told in the big picture.
Could you say that a little bit louder for the people in the back? Because they're not getting that. And that's the biggest issue, the fact that people are not understanding that our history is not being told properly. And when I say our history, I'm talking American history. I'm not talking Black history. I'm not talking just plain history. Plain history is our history as a whole. And until people start to recognize and realize that, that's when the change will start to come in. It's all the same. There's no difference in it. We wouldn't have one without the other. And I don't see how that,
Well, if I can jump in there for just a second, I think a lot of it's because marginalized people haven't been allowed to tell their own stories. our stories have been crafted and tried to be force fed back to us. And I think now that we're in an age where marginalized people, and there's a lot of different marginalized people in America, now have the tools and the technology and the courage and the ability and the talent to tell their own stories.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. And that is, history is always told by that group that is in power,
Oh.
and the person and the group that also has the weaponry.
Oh.
And that includes, I mean, it's remembered that how many ethnic groups from Europe were not even considered white until the 1900s.
Hmm.
And so, so you can't just automatically go say, oh, okay, well, you're white. I mean, it's only coalesced these days since the civil rights movement to then have a count of those of European descent to add as a dominant factor against those of African descent or Latinos or Latinx or Asian or any person of color, which per people of color means any person not European. So that's you in terms of my own culture. I have now read so many books that people have written about my culture, and I see the missing information. And that's why I say I have to get the stories as much as possible from the elders and those, and remember that the culture that I lived. And so that's what I'm also writing about, my own cultural experience overlaid with those of the elders that I've interviewed so far, and trying to get more and more of the stories that is significant to the culture, my culture, because it's not necessarily, you can't cookie stamp it and say, oh, this is that person's African story and my group and my culture is another person's African story. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
It all depends on which ship came in. If you're even, and this is a dangerous thing to say, if you're even enslaved, because not all Africans were enslaved in this country, they're indentured or even free.
Well, I left that last point in our final minutes because we're all storytellers. You're a
Yes.
storyteller, I'm a storyteller, Althea is a storyteller, most of our guests are. And the stories provide evidence of a rich, multi-layered culture, a rich,
Yes.
multi-layered history, but even more importantly, they usually have names. And the more that we're sharing our histories and stories, the more that we use those names will help other researchers in the research that they're doing.
That's right. So out there, do you have any links before we sign off with you? Do you have any links that people can go to in order for them to learn more about you and if they, hear some of your stories that you tell and things that you write?
Well, I am still adding in some stories onto my website, which is altheasumter.com. Easy enough, I guess. It is Sumter with a P. To remember that. So it's ALTHEASUMPTER.com. So please be patient with me because, yeah, as a geek, yes, I am. I love technology. I also am building my own website, and I do understand the technical issues and such because I've always had my hand in technology. Combining the two, you have to use the technology, then to tell the stories. And so I have the combining of the two areas. And so that's how to then reach me as well. And 2,000 people, please don't flood my email.
Excellent. But again, we'll be adding additional resources. There's a wonderful website called They Had Names. It has extensive research on the Gullah Geechee that were sold as part of the Weeping Time. There's the Weeping Time Descendants Facebook group.
Yes.
There's Afrogenus. There's Low Country Africana. So we'll probably be posting about 8 or 9 links, as well as a link to Althea's website.
Yes. So thank you so much for being with us out there. And I hope you can go back and check on this video. And if someone has a question, you'll be able to answer it. I do apologize once again for us not being able to, give you the questions that our fans and our followers normally have or ask, or just their feedback on what it is that you say. This was a very highly anticipated show. So it's really kind of sad that they weren't able to talk to you. So that means we have to have her back one day.
Yes,
Oh my.
absolutely.
How about that one? So again,
Oh, thank you so much. And there are links that maybe I'll add onto my website as well, because people are developing a lot more links as well on the Low Country, history and genealogy.
okay, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to our audience. And again, sorry for the glitches, but we will be seeing you in 2 weeks.
All right.
Okay.
See you guys.